For 10 dry years, he spoke to no one, until his last silver dollar bought the girl they'd left shackled in dust. Wind scraped the Dakota Plateau clean of every color but rust. Each dawn, Elias Ward, once a laugh-loud ranch hand, now mute by choice, rode fence lines of a half-starved homestead. No voice greeted the sunrise, only the wheeze of an aging chestnut gelding and the creak of leather grown brittle with neglect. The bank had taken half his herd, drought robbed the rest. Words he'd decided cost more water than they earned. On a late July afternoon, Ward drove two scrawny steers to Hanson's auction yard, planning to trade meat for winter nails. The yard buzzed, traders, gamblers, dust-bitten drifters. At the far pen, a different bidding rose. Not cattle, but a young native girl, wrists iron-bitten, ankles roped to a splintered post. Sunlight glared on her raven braid, crusted with mud. Her cheek bore a fresh, welt purple as prairie dusk. Men called her brat, runaway, cheap at $10. She looked at none of them, eyes fixed on horizon, mouth pressed flat as riverstone. Ward felt silence shiver. 10 years he'd bartered without syllables, yet the auctioneer's bark stabbed deeper than drought. Coin clinked. Bids climbed. 12, 13, 14. Voices hungry for something other than cattle flesh. Ward's fingers closed on the last silver eagle in his pocket. Money meant to keep roof shingles come December. He stepped forward. 13 men blocked his path. Breath burned, but words would not rise. Instead, he lifted coin above the crowd, fist tight. Auctioneer squinted. 15? Ward nodded once. No challenge followed. Thirst already gnawed the bidders' throats. Gavel slammed. Chains rattled. Ward tugged bandana from neck, wrapped the girl's blistered wrists, then severed rope with his pocket knife. She did not flinch. He led her through gawking silence, chestnut pacing slow so shackled ankles kept pace. Outside town, heat rippled off wagon ruts. Ward halted beneath a dying cottonwood, poured canteen water over her bruised wrists. She studied him, cautious, measuring, but still no voice met the dust. At last she spoke first, words low, Lakota accent soft yet edged. Name? Ward tapped throat, shook head. Her brow lifted, half question, half pity. She placed palm on his sternum. Heart still speaks, she murmured. He swallowed, unsure if the sound was wind or promise. They reached Ward's ranch by Moon's cradle. Empty corrals yawned like broken ribs. 3 cows huddled under lean-to. Windmills squealed for grease it hadn't tasted in seasons. He led her into the cabin. Single cot, cold stove, a Bible unopened since bullets at Medicine Creek had stolen his brother and his voice the same dawn. She took blanket from wall peg, laid on floor near the door, chain still clamped to ankle but slack. Ward pointed to cot, shook head no floor, yet she settled where she chose. Gaze steady, refusal gentle as moth wings. Dawn found her at the pump, working handle despite chain's drag. Water splashed tin, her lips whispering prayer to spirits he'd long stopped trusting. She tended the cows, rubbed cracked teats with salve, milked quiet enough to hear grasshoppers click. Ward watched through window slats, throat tight with questions that knew no way out. Mid-morning, dust plume rose along north fence. 3 riders from McCready Cattle, the outfit that sold the girl. They reined at gate, smug in saddle shine. Thief, the leader spat. Bill of sale void. She bolted before gavel. Ward stepped onto porch, rifle cradled. He did not speak. He didn't need to. Beryl's twin eyes told story. Riders laughed until the girl limped into view, bucket in hand, chain glinting. Laughter stuttered, then died. Her calm more cutting than gunmetal. Leader hawked phlegm, flicked reins, retreated with promise of law papers. Ward oiled rifle that evening, hands steady though pulse stormed. Girl unhooked chain padlock with a bent nail she'd palmed at the barn. She carried the shackle inside, laid it on table like unwanted bread. Ward met her gaze. Shame prickled. No chains, she said, voice iron. He nodded, throat burning with words still jailed. She offered half a tin cup of fresh milk, survival measured in sips. Night settled, cooler. Ward stared at ceiling cracks, listening to soft scratch of her breathing by hearth. 10 years of chosen silence began to ache like a too-tight boot. He rose, fetched an old branding iron from trunk, W scorched black, set it beneath her blanket edge, symbol of belonging he could not voice. She traced the iron's curve, then placed it back in trunk, gently shutting lid. Belonging earned, not given, she whispered into dark. He lay awake, tasting truth like creek water after dust. Somewhere outside, wind shifted. Clouds gathered a scent of rain the valley hadn't known in months. For the first time in a decade, Ward's lips opened, not to speak, but to breathe deep enough that tomorrow might carry something larger than silence. Wind dragged low thunder across the plain, promising rain or trouble, maybe both. In the half-light before dawn, the girl, still nameless to him, stood barefoot in warm dust, lifting her face to the sky as if mapping clouds by scent alone. Chains lay in the cabin, rust flaking like old scorn. Elias Ward saddled the chestnut, jerking cinch a notch tighter than habit. He did not plan to ride far, only to the fence break McCready riders had cut months before. But something in the air told him Miles might choose him anyway. The girl slipped a coil of baling wire across his palm, understanding task without words. He nodded gratitude he could not speak. They rode together, she behind the cantle, fingers curled into mane. At the break they found more than sagging rails, fresh hoof scars, boot prints, a scrap of blue cloth torn from McCready livery. Ward set posts. She tamped soil, cadence of partnership stitching morning. When rails held taut, she pressed a palm to new wood, eyes closed, blessing or assurance. Returning home, they discovered the county marshal waiting, papers fluttering like frightened doves in his fist. McCready brand on letterhead. Claim, unlawful purchase, harboring stolen property, fine equal to herd value. The marshal read charges. Ward listened, jaw clenched. Words threatened to break free, yet lodged like thorns. The girl stepped forward, lifted shackled ankle. Raw welts, proof of imprisonment before auction. She raised her skirt hem just enough to show rust stains, then dropped it. Marshall's eyes softened beneath brim. He turned pages, finding no clause for cruelty. Court in 2 days, he muttered, handing notice, then rode off slower than he'd arrived. That night, lightning crawled river blue along distant ridge. Ward oil-stoned his axe, steel humming under wet. The girl brewed yarrow tea, placed mug beside him. Steam traced silent sentences to the rafters. Fight comes, but find soft first. He sipped, bitterness steadied hands. At midnight, sky cracked. Rain slanted through chinks in barn roof. Cows bellowed. They sprinted together, patching holes with saddle blankets. Laughter breaking his throat open. Sound like gravel rolled from cave. She turned, surprised. He managed 2 hoarse syllables. A name. Ang Pei Tu, she answered, voice soft thunder. Morning. Rain quit by dawn, leaving mud that smelled like resurrection. They filled barrels to the lip, scrubbed grime off Solace's flanks. Ang Pei Tu braided mane with thin strips of prairie sage, weaving scent into hair. Ward watched, chest heavy with unspoken gratitude. Day before court, McCready's men lit grass along boundary, hoping fire would send cattle into open claim. Wind shifted north at last moment, flames licking only barren ground. Ward and Ang Pei Tu beat embers with wet sacks, smoke blackening cheeks. When final spark died, he coughed out 3 words. First full sentence in 10 years. They won't stop. Ang Pei Tu placed a hand over his mouth, then his heart. Speak here, she whispered, then out. Court morning, dusty street, weather-peeled clapboard hall. Town gathered, some for spectacle, some for justice they didn't expect to find. Ward entered, hat in hand, Ang Pei Tu beside him in clean calico, borrowed from the preacher's wife. Chains absent, scars not. McCready sat flanked by hired witnesses, smirk loaded for verdict. Judge Hawthorne called first statement. Silence clawed Ward's throat. Ang Pei Tu slipped 2 fingers to his pulse. Rhythm steadied. He faced bench, voice like rusty hinge yet clear. I bought freedom, not flesh. They sold what they had chained. Murmur rippled. He unwrapped bandana from her wrists, exposing healed scabs. Gasps. One juror spat curse toward McCready table. Ang Pei Tu spoke next. Lakota lilt mellow yet strong. Auction price, knights chained, mule pen stench. She never quivered. Rain in her syllables washed dust off every doubt. When words finished, she lifted torn blue cloth found at fence, laid it on rail. Evidence heavier than any gun. Verdict came quick. Sale legal, treatment prior illegal. Damages owed Ward $200. McCready fined double to tribal agency. Court adjourned. Outside, townsfolk crowded, pressing coins, seed packets, fresh-cut boards, reparations from hearts not laws. McCready rode off alone, shadow long in noon glare. Back at ranch, Ward placed settlement money in coffee tin, buried it beneath new peach sapling. Engpetu smiled. Roots would guard fortune better than banks. That evening they stood by pond. Frogs tuned twilight hymn, water holding sky's last color. Ward whispered, voice steadier. Stay. Angpetu answered by dipping cane tip into pond, tracing small circle that widened until it touched both their boots. September lowered a faint haze of wood smoke over Powder Ridge, while the first peaches blushed under fresh-cut burlap tags. Angpetu had punched those tags by touch. Firm. Keep for jam. Let flower again. Each letter pierced in straight rows with an awl. Elias Ward, once mute beneath drought and grief, patched roof shingles while she arranged drying racks. Thin muslin stretched on willow frames. Slices of pale fruit rustling in the high air like small paper wings. Two late calves tested their legs by nudging Solace's powerful flank. The gray mule endured the headbutts as a patient aunt might, blinking his long lashes at the commotion. Down by the dam, reeds planted for reinforcement swayed against a pond now holding its line. Water neither stole nor spilled, only reflected, deep and certain. The first frost warning came from a sky gone sheet metal blue. Elias set aside hammer and stepped into the yard to see Angpetu, balancing barefoot on shale. Her head tilted, tasting wind as though it were soup. Snow on the northern back, she murmured. An hour later, wet flakes began to fall, strange, heavy early, coating corral rails in white crust, embowing the barn roof with new weight. Shingle patches wouldn't help the barn. Elias grabbed poles, Angpetu fetched lanterns, and together they propped the sagging ridge beam. Straw smelled of summer, even beneath the cold. Their breath rose as a single plume. Somewhere between hammer strikes, Elias found himself whispering a memory he had never spoken aloud. The screaming wind at Medicine Creek, his brother's last cry, the way Elias's own voice had died with it. Angpetu set her palm on the scar beneath his cheekbone, tracing its ragged edge as though it were a creek bed on a map. Your brother became an echo, she said. Echoes still call. We plant one here. She led him to the orchard's newest row and helped him carve his brother's name, Takya, into the bark of a young tree. Sap welled, amber sweet, sealing the vow. When dawn laid silver on the snow, they found the roof still standing and the pond brim full. Angpetu went to the drying house, pulled the muslin, and scattered sweetened slices into baskets for the town market. Elias lifted one to his mouth. It tasted of frost and August sun, somehow both at once. Word traveled that Caleb Rusk had left the county after his failed claim. Barton himself sold his barren acres to cactus herders and moved east. With trouble gone, neighbors ventured out, trading seed wheat and strips of iron for jars of peach preserve. Elias spoke sparingly, but he spoke, enough to barter fair, enough to point toward the pond and say, "Water's still holding." People listened. Early winter set in with a brittle snap. The dam stayed sure. The fruit racks emptied into town wagons. Solace flicked his tail and watched cattle grow thick against the chill. One moonlit night, Angpetu stirred a pot of boiled yarrow and honey. She poured a mug for Elias, placing it beneath his roughened hands. Steam coiled up in the cold, carrying the scent of summer fields. For the inside chill, she said. He tasted bitter bite and warmth, then noticed her eyes, sightless but shining with every reflection the pond kept from day. When the first full moon of December rose, Elias set the old branding iron on the porch rail. Instead of heating it, he coated the metal in white paint and pressed it into a cedar plank. E-W-N-A, his initials interlocked with hers. He hung the board on the gate and straightened its nails. Angpetu touched the letters. Her fingers trembled just once. "Now the trees can read us," she whispered. On the last night of the year, snow melted into a delicate fog. They stood by the pond where frogs slept under ice and the reeds held still. Elias broke the hush. Not a whisper, a spoken sentence smooth as creek water. "The ground is listening?" And Petu nodded, her breath blooming in the air. She slipped off her shoes, let toes find the mud's edge, and tapped the surface with her cane. Ripples spread wide enough to lick both their boots, a perfect circle folding into dark. In that quiet, Elias felt the world's pulse thrum beneath his ribs, louder than any voice he had hidden for a decade. Snowflakes began again, tiny, bright, each one finding the pond and melting into it without leaving a mark. Elias realized suddenly that silence, too, was just snowfall, something that could vanish into water if the water was deep enough to receive it. The pond was deep now. The orchard listened. The house behind them no longer needed its door bolted against the past. Roots had found their water, and soon in the long quiet of winter, they would deepen still. January passed bone cold, each sunrise glazing the orchard in glassy rime. Solace stamped holes in the crust so calves could drink. The pond kept a narrow breathing lane where the reeds stood tallest. By lantern, Elias sharpened worn chisels and mended the handplow. Anpetu spun rough wool into cord, humming a hymn that sounded older than the house. When February sun finally climbed high enough to soften roof icicles, a government surveyor arrived. Trim beard, stovepipe hat, spectacles fogged from the ride. He carried brass levels and crisp papers stamped with Washington ink. The railroad, he explained, would cut a spur across Powder Ridge. Tracks needed water stops. His map showed a straight line cleaving the orchard and splitting the pond. Eminent domain. Compensation followed, of course. Coin enough to buy fruit elsewhere. Elias felt his ribs tighten the way boards bow when frost meets nail. For a long moment he said nothing, letting the silence lengthen until even Solace stopped chewing. Then the words, no longer slow, no longer rusty, came clear. "There are no tracks through roots." The surveyor shrugged pity and docketed a date for final measurement. That night, Anpetu set 2 bowls of stone-milled corn near the hearth, then knelt by the cedar plank that bore their intertwined initials. Her cane tapped the wood twice. "Rails are straight," she said, voice steady. "We bend." Elias shook his head, but she laid a hand over his pulse. "Straight things break," she whispered. "Curves endure." She traced a circle in soot on the hearthstone. Pond, orchard, house, lives, then rested her palm flat in the center. At first thaw, they harnessed Solace to the ditch plow and turned a new channel that looped behind the orchard rather than slicing it. Each curve followed the low place where spring snowmelt naturally gathered. Neighbor boys laughed at the twisting path until they saw standing water pool in every bend, brilliant as hammered tin in morning light. Frog chorus returned a month early. Reeds thickened. Cattails anchored fresh banks. The surveyor returned, raised his level, and cursed. The new waterway qualified as navigable runoff. Federal code forbade track beds through a riparian course. His papers folded smaller, his hat brim drooped. He rode away muttering about unexpected wetlands. In March, sap pushed into peach buds, rosy fires along bare wood. Anpetu walked the rows at dawn, cane tapping with each new breath of color she could only feel on her skin. Elias followed, grafting scions onto hardy rootstock. At the tree named for Takya, he paused. The cut he had made in winter healed clean, bark knitting like quiet forgiveness. He pressed a finger to it and finally spoke his brother's name aloud, clear as creek water. Wind passed through branches, scattering the last of the ice like glass swept from a church floor. Spring thunder cracked open the valley. Rain hammered dam and roof, but the pond only swelled into its new curves, slipping gentle through cattails and out again, past the north fence, feeding ground Barton once called barren. Grass leapt where dust had ruled, and even the judge's thin mare found green enough to graze. People spoke of it as a miracle. Elias knew it was a circle drawn in soot and believed into mud. One afternoon, a small procession approached. 3 Lakota elders draped in weather-bleached blanket stripes. They had heard of the girl who returned from chains and the man who found voice in water. Anpetu welcomed them with dried peach slices and the last jar of honey. They walked the orchard in silence, palms grazing budding twigs. At the pond they knelt, dipping fingertips, letting droplets fall back like tiny bells. The eldest produced a pouch of crushed shell and scattered it across the water. Flecks flashed, then sank, a gift to whatever spirits nested below. They spoke sparingly, yet before they left, the elder pressed into Elias's hand a stone bead the color of dawn. Circle holds. His grip tightened around it. Tears he thought long evaporated warmed the corners of his eyes. When they were gone, Anpetu slid the bead onto a thin leather cord, tying it just beneath the amber on her wrist. Late April exploded in white-pink bloom. Frogs sang nighttime concerts so loud the rafters vibrated. Elias built extra hive boxes. Bees arrived as if summoned, drifting golden in every petal cup. Anpetu listened to the hum, smiling as if each wing beat translated into a language only her heart could read. One pale morning she guided his hand to her belly. Small curve, new breath beneath skin. Words failed him again, but this time the silence held nothing of drought. It brimmed like first rain in a waiting cistern. He knelt there, ear to the quiet promise, while petals drifted around them like the year's first soft snow. Beyond the fence, the curved water shimmered, scattering early sunlight back into the orchard. Tracks would divert miles south now, surveyors said, following a straighter pass far from roots and reeds. Steel would still run, but over other ground. Here, circles reigned, pond around stone, arms around hearts, wind around fruit soon to swell into sweetness. July heat entered sharp, metallic, the smell of sun-baked iron and distant lightning. Yet under every peach tree the soil remained spring-soft, dark with the curving water Angpetu had foreseen. Bees stitched gold between blossoms and hive boxes. Honey dripped thick as axle grease, sweet enough to coat the whole valley in slow forgiveness. Elias built a cradle from leftover cedar slats, carving along its rail tiny waves to match the pond. Most nights he sanded by lamplight. Angpetu sat nearby, winding peach blossom petals into thin cords for the cradle's mattress ties. When she moved, the dawn stone and amber beads at her wrist clicked, a pocket metronome for new life taking shape inside her. One afternoon, a freight wagon creaked up the lane. The railroad agent, coat off, hat in hand. Word had spread that Ward fruit fetched twice the price of any East Line shipment. He offered a contract, peaches by the ton, freight paid, if the couple would send wagons to the spur every harvest. Elias read the figures, coin enough to roof every barn in the county. He looked at Angpetu. Without sight, she still felt the paper's greed trembling. She shook her head once. "We'll sell," she said softly, "but at a price water can bear." They offered half the yield. Agent sputtered, then took the deal. Desert fruit was worth the compromise. August brought labor pains as sudden as prairie storms. While clouds towered, Elias hitched solace, racing to summon the preacher's wife and the town midwife. Thunder rolled, pond glowed pewter, and in the cabin light wavered like candle wicks in wind-hungry church aisles. Angpetu's voice never rose above a chant she'd learned from her grandmother, a song for roots pushing through dark soil. By dawn's first blade, a cry answered hers, a boy slick with newness, lungs pulling orchard air, the color of rosy mud. They named him Takiawiaka, Echo of Dawn, after the brother whose name healed a tree. The midwife marveled that the infant's fists already grasped for nothing and held it tight, like seedlings gripping unseen earth. Elias placed his son's palm against the cedar cradle rail. Tiny fingers rested on carved waves, recognizing the shape as if he dreamt it. Summer waned. Barrels filled with fruit so fragrant, even freight workers paused to breathe before loading. Ward Orchard became a pause in every freighter's route, a swallow of shade, a cup dipped in clear curved water, a jar of honey handed with no charge. Travelers left stories in trade, news of markets and cousins, songs from distant counties, and each tale floated through the trees, catching on leaves until the whole orchard spoke in gentle murmur after sunset. In September, they held a naming feast. Neighbors packed benches between the outermost rows. Lakota elders returned, laying fresh shell dust at pond's mirrored rim. The judge came, and even the bank clerk who once served foreclosure notices. Under a canopy of peach limbs bending with gold, a single violin led every tongue into the same melody. Elias, once mute at the edge of gatherings, sang a verse, rough, short, unsteady. But his son stirred in Angpetu's rap and cooed, recognizing the broken tune as whole. As dusk melded into blue, Angpetu pressed one hand against the trunk of Takya-named tree. Sap pulsed warm under bark. She spoke to Elias without turning. Roots take what they need. Leaves give more than they take. We do the same. He answered by setting the old branding iron, now repainted, not burned, into the earth at the base of the tree. Steel glinted once in twilight, then rustled to quiet as if it were just another root. Later they sat on the dam wall, baby nestled between. Frogs stitched night with silver croaks, pond reflecting three shadows as one. Elias skimmed a pebble across the surface, ripple upon ripple, widening until the farthest reed quivered. Angpetu listened, smiling when the circles touched her bare toes. Voices travel like that, she said. Even whispers reach where we cannot see. Elias laced his fingers with hers. Wind slid through branches, lifting the beads on her wrist into a soft rattle, as though dawn itself had found a lullaby and refused to let it fall. Autumn's first cool breath drifted across the ridge, carrying the scent of apples ripening miles away. Somewhere out there, trains whistled, steel meeting steel. But here the orchard answered with rustling leaves and a single infant breath. Surer, louder, destined to outlast any engine. In the hush that followed, the water curved on, round and patient, teaching stone to listen and a long silent man to speak.